Hey everyone, Jordan with Voigt Smith Innovation. Today we're going to go through an overview of the setup and use of your 2020 VSI stainless steel brine maker. Obviously the first thing we're going to do is unload it and we're going to put it in the shop where it needs to go. This stainless piece here is your mixing hopper. This will go in front or the most accessible point, and then the back 1,050 gallon poly storage tank will go in back. That's going to be your batch tank where all of the mixed brine overflows into. So this is the piece that you're actually going to be loading your salt into with your loader. So once we get the tank placed behind the stainless steel mixing hopper, we want to make sure that that tank is pushed as close to the stainless steel as we can, and then we're going to install our hoses. There's going to be one hose that comes off of our manifold and goes to the bottom suction line on our 1,050 gallon batch tank. There's going to be another line that comes off of the upper valve on the left side of our brine maker as you're looking at it. That's going to go, that's the mid drain for the mixing hopper that's going to go into the back tank on the higher fitting. After you get it all set up, now it's time to set up your plumbing and your electrical. So now that our brine maker is placed, the first thing we're going to do is hook up our electrical. You're going to want to make sure you hire a qualified electrical contractor to do this, but I'm going to run through the basics of it, so if your electricians have any questions, you can reference this information. So first of all, typically on our 2020 units, there is a junction box that's mounted to the brine maker right here. We don't have one on ours because in our shop, we have the switch mounted to the wall. But if you want to use this box, it is a waterproof box with a switch on it. You simply supply a 2-pole 220 volt 30 amp switch, put it inside the box, run power from your shop to the switch, run power out of the switch down to your motor, and then inside the motor junction box here, you'll see clearly labeled instructions that the pumps need to be wired opposite rotation. There is a diagram on there showing your electrician how to wire that. However, to keep it simple, black and blue go to one hot wire, red and yellow go to the other hot wire, green goes to your ground. Simple as that. So the next thing is you're going to install your water connection. Now in our shop, we don't have sufficient water flow rate to feed this system. Typically speaking, if you have less than 45 gallon a minute water service, you're going to want a float tank to provide your brine maker with optimal performance and water supply. This tank here is a 3,000 gallon water float tank. Up in the top of the tank, we have a Hudson valve with a 1-inch line plumb to it. That way, anytime we're drawing water from our float tank into our brine maker, it's automatically starting to refill as soon as that water level drops at all. So we have our water plumbed from the 2-inch fitting on the tank into our manifold into this back valve. So now anytime we want to fill the system with water, we simply open up that valve, open up the agitation valve, turn on our pump. Now we're filling with water. If you do have a sufficient water supply and you do not need to use a float tank, you can do the same thing. You can plumb your water supply right into the manifold, open that valve to start filling with water. Just make sure to check local regulations, because if you're plumbing directly in, you may need a backflow prevention device. So now that our brine maker is placed, we've hooked up our 2 hoses to our back tank, we've hooked up our electrical, plumbed in our water. Now it's time to make our first batch. Now the weird thing with a batch brine making system is that the first batch is going to be different than any other batch you're going to do, and you'll see why in a little bit. But basically, because there's no salt in this hopper yet, or at least your new setup won't have any salt in this hopper yet, you're going to have to fill it almost all the way full with salt to start out. So I usually recommend putting a little bit of water in there first. Otherwise, when you dump the salt in, it tends to shoot salt dust everywhere. It's up to your preference, but typically speaking, you're going to fill the salt up to about this line. And we want to make sure that anytime we're loading salt in this system, whether it's a first batch or any batch, we're always orienting our salt to this third of the hopper. So we don't want to be dumping salt all the way up into the back of the hopper, because what can happen is the salt can end up in your overflow in your back tank. Then you're going to have salt in your back tank, and you're not going to be happy about that. So we're going to get our loader. If we were doing our first batch, we're going to fill this thing full. And we'll just pretend the first batch is done, because like I said, it's kind of a one-time thing. Only time is going to be your first batch and any time after you clean the system out. Now we're going to go through the normal process of what it's like to do continuous batch making. So after we loaded all of our salt for our first batch and we filled our system with water, we agitated the whole batch to 23% on our salinometer here. 23.3 is the final desired, but we're actually going to start pumping out at 23. I've got my pump turned off because it's too loud for the video. So pretend my pump's running. While the pump is still running, you don't have to turn it off. Hit 23%. You're going to open your brine pump out valve. That goes to your storage tanks. Simultaneously, you're going to close your agitation valve. Now you've diverted the flow from your pump. Instead of agitating in your mixing hopper, you started pumping outside. Now, as that brine is pumping outside, it's a perfect time to go get your next load of salt for your next batch. And the reason for this is because as you load that next load of salt in your mixing hopper, you're going to overflow additional higher percentage brine into your back tank, which is why we recommend pumping out at 23, because typically speaking, the brine inside your mixing tank is closer to like 26%. So that 50 to 100 gallons of overflow is going to bring you up to the desired 23.3%. So now Ben is going to load our salt. After that initial batch where you have to put in like 4 tons of salt, you only need to do about 22 to 2,400 pounds of additional salt per batch, depending on the purity of your salt. You'll want to make sure when you're loading your salt, you dump your salt in slowly. If you dump the salt in too fast, what can happen is you can create a wave inside your brine maker. You'll end up splashing out the backside of it. If this does happen, don't panic, not the end of the world. We're just trying to prevent a mess for you. So watch how Ben loads the brine maker now. So you can see how slowly and carefully Ben was loading. Now that is a 1.25 yard bucket, so it does have to be loaded a little slower than the typical skid steer bucket would. But you can see how not only loaded slowly, but he also loaded towards the front, towards the loading side. Again, that's to prevent salt from getting into your overflow. And the ideal amount of salt, like I said, between 22 and 2,400 pounds, you're typically going to know when you have the right amount of salt because there's going to be a little mountain or a little mound of salt on this edge of the brine maker after you're done loading. It should stick above the water between 4 and 8 inches. So now remember, the whole time that Ben was loading his salt, this finished first batch was pumping out to our storage tanks. Again, I have the pump off because for the sake of the video it's too loud. But let's just pretend that Ben's loaded his salt, he's overflowed additional finished brine into my batch tank. Let's say that batch tank is done pumping to our storage tanks. You'll usually be able to tell by either obviously looking at your batch tank or also by listening for your pump. You'll hear when it starts to lose prime and suck air, meaning your back tank is empty. As soon as that back tank becomes empty, we don't actually have to shut off our pump at all. This is where the continuousness of our batch making brine cycle is super nice and efficient. So leave our pump running. Again, we're going to switch our valves back. Brine pump out off, agitation on. Now all we need to do is refill the system with water. We've already added our salt for our next batch. We've already pumped out our finished first batch of brine. Now we just got to add water. Again, we're adding water through our agitation system. That way you're not only adding water to the system, but also blending your salt brine at the same time. Open our water valve, and away we go. Now, the cycle will just continue over and over. You can do as many in a row as you want. Really nice to not even worry about turning your pump on and off. Just keep it running. Switch these, water on and off, and that's about it. Now, another great feature with our brine makers is the truck fill system. You might be wondering, why are there additional valves down here that we haven't used yet? Well, we're going to show you how to use the manifold system and the truck fill feature. So now in order to use my truck fill feature, again, we're going to use the manifold behind me to control what's going in the trucks. But we're going to use our supplied fill line. Yours might look a little different than this one, but same concept. We're going to cam lock connect it on to our truck fill port, which is labeled here, truck fill. We're going to connect it on our truck side, which we'll show you in a second. We're going to open this valve up, and then we're going to select the product that's going into the truck with our manifold. Again, this line here with the T in it, with the line going that way, is always going to be your salt brine. That's coming from your salt brine tanks. And we would encourage you to label your valves just so no one ever mixes it up. And then again, this is your additive valve. We'd always recommend filling your salt brine first and your additive last. So now we'll show you how it actually works. So we hooked one end up to our truck fill line, and the other end obviously hooks up to our truck with the same 2-inch female cam lock. We'll hook up there. We're going to make sure that we open the appropriate valves on our spray unit because obviously if valves on our spray unit are open, our brine maker pump's going to be pushing against a dead line and it's not going to actually fill the truck. So in this case, we're going to open this one and also this one. Now we're going to select our product from our manifold. Again, we're going to fill our salt brine first. Always making sure that these are turned off when we're doing this. We don't want to be pulling product from our outside tanks or having our agitation system open. Also important to make sure our back tank valve is closed from our brine maker batch tank. Now everything's set up correctly. Our brine line is turned on. We'll turn on our pump. One of the optional features on our brine maker is this digital banjo flow meter. What this will do is it'll actually count the gallons going into your truck. That way you can precisely make your brine and brine blends. Let's say I'm filling a 1,000-gallon spray unit. I want to do a 90-10 blend, 90% brine, 10% additive. I can read this display, easily know that I need 900 gallons of brine, 100 gallons additive, and I can get it precise every time. For those without this upgrade, all of the tanks, at least on the VSI spray units, do have gallon indicators. So you also could just fill your tank up to the 900-gallon level with your brine and then fill the remaining 100 gallons with your additive. But it's always nice to have peace of mind that it's getting filled accurately every time, especially with how expensive some additives are. So the final feature, again, it's not on our unit here because we don't have air, shop air in this bay here, but your brine maker comes standard with an air purge feature. So after your truck is totally full, valves are still open on your truck, this valve is still open, there's going to be an air purge line right here that you can open. It's going to flush all of the remaining fluid out of your line. That way, when you disconnect it, you're not going to spill all over the floor. So that's a basic overview of how to install, set up, and use your VSI brine maker. There's a few other things, including your SensorX salinity reader. It doesn't come calibrated from the factory, and this is because based on your water hardness and the purity of your salt, it has to be calibrated at each location. There's an in-depth video on our YouTube channel and on the Getting Started menu on the app that will go through every step-by-step on how to calibrate that. You can also find all of that information and all the information we just made in this video in the printed version of the manual. If you need technical specs for your electrician, or if you need water flow specs or any of that kind of thing, all of that is printed in the manual. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to give us a call, and we hope you have a great day.